Hi, I recently had a need to convert a Sony NEX5 camera to infrared, or more specifically to an NDVI camera where you see color as well as infrared light. As you can see an example of an image like that here, actually taken with the camera that I used after it was converted. Here again you can see, because of the very bright reflection of infrared light in the red channel of the camera, you get this red appearance of green vegetation, and the use, of course, is then you can calculate a vegetation index from that. So how do we go about that? First thing is to remove the battery and the memory card, and after that we're going to get into removing a whole bunch of little screws. So I don't know what the actual number is, I didn't count them, but there are quite a few, and the strategy that I used was to remove the screws one by one, and as I went through it stage by stage, so different sides of the camera and then different components removed, I just kept those little screws together. So that helped me when I had to put the whole thing back together again, to know which screws had to be put where and in what sequence. So here you can see the first screws at the bottom of the camera being taken out. You just go systematically through them, and carefully look on all the sides and make sure that you remove all the little screws. And of course, as you're looking at this, one thing that you have to be very careful of when doing this is you have to have a clean environment. So the surfaces have to be clean, your hands must be clean. You have to do it in an environment that is going to be dust free for the most part. I did it in my garage, but I did not do anything that would create dust around the same time. And I made very sure that I had a clean surface to work on.
Gewone skroefies oral. Maar hierso het jy 'n baie kort een en hierso het jy 'n lang een.
There, I was just making comments in Afrikaans, which is my mother tongue. So here, once the outside screws had been removed, I could pry open the back cover for the camera. So it takes a little bit of fiddling, but eventually you can pull it all apart.
Okay, ek het nie nog 'n skroefie gemis, lyk my nie, maar al hierdie flaps en goed moet oop wees.
And there what I'm saying is that the flaps must be open, because otherwise they actually hold that back part of the camera on as well. So that's just a plastic back cover. And then the process starts again. So now there is another set of little screws that you have to remove. Having a high quality small screwdriver for this job makes it a whole lot easier. Okay, and then as you go along, you'll see the connections, the electrical connections within the camera are generally made by ribbon connectors, and there are a lot of them. So just be careful as you go along. Before you start ripping things off from each other, make sure that you have carefully remove those ribbon connectors. Here I'm removing the screws that hold on the tripod mount. The camera has a metal internal frame, and you know the places where strength is critical, those components will be attached to the metal internal frame, as is this mount here. And the same thing applies to the attachment points where your straps would go. Those two screws there stumped me for a while because they were hidden by a plastic component. There was a plastic component over those attachment points. So it took a bit of head scratching before I found where those were. And then in some places there are, parts that might come loose that are just sort of kept in place with friction fits, and there was one of those little components. So once you're at this stage, then you can take the whole display unit off of the camera. And there I'm indicating another one of those ribbons that you have to be careful of, not to rip them out and damage them. Okay, there is I think that's just for insulation purposes that you take off. It has a glue on it that will stick back on again when you reassemble the camera. And something I found worked very well for removing the ribbons without damaging them were toothpicks. So I'm just sort of slowly prying them loose and trying to get them out without causing any damage. Some of those attachment points have a locking mechanism like you saw there, and then others don't. They just have a friction fit. Like the ones on this side, they have just a friction fit, and you just have to slowly work them out. There are little tabs on either side of the ribbon, and you just sort of wiggle from one side to the other until eventually the whole thing comes out. And nothing in this whole conversion is really difficult to do. It is just, that you have to have, there are quite a large number of steps. But as long as you do it systematically, there's really not too much that's too difficult. It's mostly just a matter of unscrewing and carefully taking out the ribbon connectors. Here there was one screw that was copper in color, so that screw probably plays an important role as a conductor. So you have to be careful so that you remember where that screw was that's copper colored, so that you get that back into the same spot. And the spot is in the top center of the camera. So although that screw is the same size as the other ones, it's important that you get that specific same screw back in that position. And here at this stage, I discovered that there was this slightly hidden ribbon as well. They're in the corner. That I'll remove in the same way using a toothpick. And you'll see there what at first appears to be two wires that might need desoldering, but not actually, so don't do that. They are just part of that whole assembly, so there's another piece of assembly that you have to remove with that. And now I'm actually at the level where that copper holder that you're seeing there is actually holding the sensor. So we are almost at the sensor now. As soon as we remove those screws, we can take the sensor out of the rest of the camera. So again, very important, be systematic. A lot of the screws need to go back in the places where they came from. You have different sizes of screws as you go along. So make sure that as you remove them, you keep them separate and in sequence. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the sensor assembly. And there it is. That's what you're after. Once you've removed that, then you are almost done. So now the next challenge is to just disassemble the sensor assembly so that you can remove the actual infrared filter that normally would block infrared light from the camera. So the first thing is to remove that copper backing, and that is just it's sort of slightly glued onto that white part of the that's on the copper, and that I'm not sure if it's an insulator or if it's just there to keep it on it, or maybe it's a conducting material. I'm not sure. So now we have a couple more screws, the last screws, before we can expose the sensor. And there is one screw that's hidden behind the ribbon. So once you remove that, then you can take the sensor itself out. Now this was a little bit, probably in terms of difficult processes in the whole thing, this was probably it. So you have to pry the infrared filter, the infrared blocking filter off the sensor, and they had used a glue to glue it around a frame that's around the sensor. So that took a bit of work. I cut down quite a bit of the time here in the video, but just very carefully, slowly working the scalpel, in along the sides. And what I'm doing now is I am replacing that filter with a color infrared filter. So this will allow near infrared light to pass, as well as blue and green. And that's what you need to produce color infrared images that eventually you can use to determine vegetation health. So I hope that was helpful. If you have questions, let me know. This was the first camera that I did of this type, so it may not be necessarily, as slick and as good as it could be, but if you want to do something like that, you're more than welcome to ask questions, and I'll help where I can. So thanks for watching. Bye-bye.